Hello and welcome to Battlefleet Gothic Armada 2 and our video looking at Imperial Navy ships. So for those people who have played the first game, the first thing you'll notice is that we have some new ships, including a whole new category in the Grand Cruisers. We'll get to those later, but for now, let's jump in and start looking with our escort ships. So these are split between destroyers and frigates. So we've got the two Cobra models as our destroyers, then the Firestorm Sword and Falchion as our frigates. Now the main difference here between them is hull points. So it's 400 hull points for our frigates and then 200 hull points for our destroyers. Now the other thing is armor. 50 armor on the two destroyers, 67 across the board here for the frigates. So the frigates are that little bit tankier, able to handle a little bit more. They've also got a bit more weaponry on them, but we'll go through that on each individual one. Now each also has the escort attribute. Essentially just means they can't use assault skills. They're dedicated, so they're neither particularly brave or unbrave, hence the reason why bravery sits at 0. And they've all got plasma reactors, so they can all do all the maneuvers. Now, the other thing to note for each of them is defense turrets. So it's 3 for the destroyers, 6 for the frigates, and troop numbers of 4 for both. Now, the destroyers are that little bit quicker than our frigates. And apart from one exception, they've all got the same identification range and shields. So we'll get to the difference in a second. Now, first off, with the Cobra, we have torpedoes and we have a light macro turret. 270 degrees front, so good field of fire. Obviously not going to do much, but it's not there to do damage. Let's be honest, it's fast moving, it's a scout vehicle. Or a capture vehicle for the people who aren't aware. Battlefleet Gothic Armada 2 in your battles has capture points, and this means that you send ships, you sit there for a bit, you capture that point, points tick up, whoever gets to the most points first can win, or you can always just go with the old destroy everyone on the other team to win. Now, torpedoes split between normal and melter. So you have 3 uses of each. So 6 in total between the two, and that's it. Once you've fired all of those rounds, you're done. No more torps. Something to keep in mind. They're not the only thing. A lot of stuff now has limited uses. Brace for impact, running silent. Now, running silent can only be used with escorts and light cruisers, making them completely invisible unless revealed by a ship moving close enough or some ability that reveals them. But if they move out of range of that, or when that ability wears off, they will go straight back to being stealthed. Lock on, reload, emergency repairs. Now for those people who haven't played the second one and are only aware of how this works in the first one, it doesn't actually repair your ship anymore. You do not get hull points back, but it will fix your light criticals and your fire aboard effects. So no red criticals, just the light criticals. Right, call to arms. You can replace some of the troops. Most of the time people aren't going to waste it on going after these, but if they do, you can. If they really want to focus it, they will drop too quick for you to be able to do it anyhow. Scanner. So this is unique to your escort ships, the scanner. So as you can see there, 13,000 units around the ship, and it just marks the ships. So for 30 seconds, it doesn't just show that they're there, they're marked. They can't hide. So the running silent command, or if they pop into a cloud, won't actually work until that 30 seconds is up. Right, and then with the Cobra Widowmaker, all of that, although one less gun, but now we pick up an extra 4,500 on our detection range. So this is important too, because you have 2 ranges. You have a detection range, and that is a running silent or a stealth ship will appear as a red dot. And then you have an ID range. This is when you'll actually be able to see what the ship is. So having this as a scout ship is quite useful. Right, Firestorm. So our weapons here are the double barrel light macro turret and a light lance artillery. So forward facing ship for firing purposes. Again, not really there to do much damage, but if you're both sending your escort ships around to try and capture points, can be quite useful against other escort ships. Sword, we lose the light lance artillery to gain a second double barrel light macro turret. And then the Falchion gets 3 light macro turrets and a torpedo launcher. So that's our escort ships. On to the light cruisers. So with the light cruisers, we essentially have two models. The 2 Dauntlesses and then the 3 down the bottom here, which are all the same model, but we'll get to that in a second. So hull, 1200, still 200 shields. We now get 83 frontal armor on our Dauntlesses. The other model only has 67. So something to keep in mind there, they will take that little bit more damage than a Dauntless at the front. Standard 9000 ID range, still decent speed. Troops go up here, we've got 9. We now pick up our boarding action and lightning strikes, and defense turrets also go up. So we've picked up our brutal strike. So this just shows it for all of them. Titans, not actually in the multiplayer version of the game. That's only in single player. And there's our troop efficiency. So you're going to see it on the side, but you can also come here and just have a quick look at what each is for our different ones. Now, the other ability that we've picked up that's not on our smaller ships is our encouraging speech. So all ships now have a morale value, and they can lose it. This is just done naturally through taking damage, certain abilities, all that sort of stuff. Now, it will trickle back over time once you're out of combat, but you can do huge boost by using the encouraging speech. Now, as for weapons, heavy lance artillery at the front, 2 double barrel light macro turrets, and some light macro weapons on the side. It's a light cruiser. It's going to do all right, but it's not your biggest damage dealer. It's best off against things of its own size or escort ships. The Dauntless Mark II, we essentially lose that lance for our torpedo launcher. Now, much like the Torps, your boarding action and your lightning strike are limited use. Again, 3 of each. Now, our newer ships. So starting with the Endeavour here, Torps, 2 macro batteries, 2 light macro turrets. So not really a huge difference between it and the Dauntlesses, although as you can see, bit cheaper. We lose that frontal armor, so it is something to keep in mind. Now, I believe they're also, yes, they're a bit slower. So, yeah, I don't know why you would take these over a Dauntless other than your points are a bit short, but personally I don't tend to run the light cruisers anyhow. But hey, I've seen people run pretty much entire fleets of them, but when they do tend to use the Dauntlesses. Right, the Endurance. So, Torps, Lancers, and light macro turrets. So now we get Lancers on our side. So you can see how a combo here of these two would probably work fairly well with you being able to get that mix of damage. And then the Defiant. So why is it so expensive? Because it comes with launch bays. And of course, our squadrons are considered to be a very expensive asset. And we also get 2 light lance turrets. Now, you get 3 uses of each of your squadrons. But here's the big thing with them. You can get these back. Except for the assault boat squadrons. 3 uses, done. But certainly for your bombers and your interceptors, yeah, these things come back. So if they go out, whether you're sending them to a spot or a ship, because for the interceptors, you can send them to just spots on the map to use as scouts. When you do so, they will return to your ship if they're not destroyed. Now, the most you can pretty much get out at once is 2. Usually that first one will return by the time your cooldowns worn off on both of them, and a third could go out. So you're really only getting 2 out at a time actually doing anything. The first one might be on the way back when the third one goes out, depending on how far away it is from your ship. But it won't actually be doing anything actively. Same for the bombers. They survive, they come back, you can use them again. So you can get multiple uses out of these. I have found that because most people tend to clump their ships together for the most part, squadrons haven't been that useful for the most part. Especially not for Imperial Navy. Some of the other fleets run slightly stronger squadrons that seem to do a bit better. But Imperial Navy ones are a little bit on the weaker side. Interceptors are still good as scouts and for defense purposes, but you just generally aren't getting enough bombers or assault boats through to really make the difference, and you're probably better off just taking actual weapons. Right, moving on to the cruisers. So we get to the cruisers, and we're going to use this, the ship viewer, because I just want to show you something. Other than the fact that you can look at your ship, and it's quite nice. This is your spur, and you'll notice it on several ships now that we've got up to these bigger ships. This is for ramming. It is quite good, and it has its own attribute. So, as you can see there, 300% extra damage if you ram them with that. Makes sense. Now, while we're in this view, you can also see here you can go through and check out the different colors that you'll get, depending on which sub-faction you pick. So if you just want to see what it looks like, go right ahead. Right, let's pop back in here, where it's a bit easier to go through these, and you can see the costings. So we've already talked about the spur. Shields, hull, bit more defense turrets, bit more troops. Our boarding action's better. We are a little bit slower. Well, slower than the Dauntlesses. Anyhow, we're about the same as these, although we do rotate slower. And front armor across the board at the 83 with 67 for the rest. Now, what do we get here for the Dictator? Well, we get torpedoes, 2 launch bays, and 2 macro weapons. So you got a bit of combination of long range and short range. Gothic, just straight up 4 lance batteries and your torpedo launchers. So all about going after that armor. The Dominator, we get a Nova Cannon. So 3 shots for the Nova Cannon, like a lot of the other stuff. Now, obviously it's got that minimum range, so once you get in close, you pretty much can't use it. But you either want to use these as a large group, so you want multiple Nova Cannons. They don't all obviously all have to be Dominators, but you want a large number of them to try and just get them all on a ship, or a couple of ships if they've got them bunched up, and get all that damage added up. With enough of these, you can pretty much take out cruiser, even battle cruiser size ships. Anything larger you probably won't kill in one volley, but you can definitely do some serious damage. Now, for these, they can be avoided because a red ring will appear. There is a countdown, so they will know it's coming. But if you can trap them in, or you find that they're already trapped, because sometimes when your ships maneuver, the AI pathing can be a bit off and they might be crashing into each other, can be useful. Can also be useful as just a one-off, as a bit of a surprise, especially if they're not paying attention to their escort ships. So an escort ship will appear somewhere, capturing one of your points, turn this around, you blast, put the center on it. This will one-shot a lot of escorts. Certainly the destroyers will just go, and your frigates will take a lot of damage. So 1 to 2 of these will take care of escort ships without much of a problem. And then macro battery weapons to back all that up. the Tyrant. So the Tyrant has torps. Then we got plasma macros, nice, long range, and normal macros, short range. So it's a bit of a mix. I don't like having this mix, but there is some benefits to having that little bit of long range. Obviously, it still works at short range. In fact, it's just got better accuracy. But again, it'll come down to personal preference. Now, the Lunar. So the Lunar's definitely my choice of cruiser. So it's got the torps, large numbers of torps fired in concert together at a more or less single direction. Very hard to avoid, and they can actually do quite a fair bit of work for you because they will just shoot across the entire battlefield, and they actually have a relatively quick reload time, allowing you to fire multiple bursts of these. I can actually get off all 3 melter torpedoes before I've even made contact with the enemy in most cases. So that's something to keep in mind. You can do a lot of pre-damage before you've even got there, and melter torpedoes in particular are good because they also tend to do quite a fair bit of morale damage. Right, and then on top of that, once we do actually get to the enemy, we have lancers and we have macros. 2 of each, good mix. We're going to chew through shields, we're going to do damage to armor, and I've just found it to be a particularly good combo. So yeah, like I said, the Lunar, my choice of cruiser. Right, the battle cruisers. Personally, I do not think your battle cruisers are worth it over the cruisers. Yes, they offer a little bit more damage because they get the turret weapons, but if we have a look at their stats, you'll note that you don't really gain anything different in terms of their stats. So all we're really getting is a couple of extra weapons for quite a fair bit of cost, if we're being honest. Your cheapest one is 210. Now you might go, well, okay, but my most expensive cruiser is 206, but I wouldn't actually use the Dictator. And the Armageddon is the cheapest out of them. The Overlord's not that much more, but realistically, these are more cost efficient, and you probably actually want to have a couple of escort ships, so spending those few extra points instead of upgrading to a battlecruiser that have an escort ship, I feel is the better way to go in this game. But let's crack into them. Torpedoes, plasma macros, and lance turret for the Overlord. So it's got a decent whack of range realistically. The Mars, Nova Cannon, launch bays, heavy macro batteries, and a lance turret. So we're still looking at a pretty hefty range, and that's probably the biggest difference. The battle cruisers are definitely more of a longer range ship than your cruisers. Right, and the Armageddon, torps, heavy lance battery, heavy macro battery, and lance turret. So there's your battle cruisers. Right, the Grand Cruisers. So this is the new line of ships. Not every faction has it, but Imperial Navy does. Now, I have had a bit of a play around with these. Now, something to note, we do get pretty tanky here. We've got 600 shields, 2,000 hull, decent defense turrets and troop numbers. We're doing all right in our boarding action and lightning strikes. Not really that much slower than our battle cruisers. Well, same actual speed, we just sort of... Actually, yep, same speed, same rotation, it's all good. So, you know, all 3 of these are going to run more or less together. They're more tanky, but no turret weapons. These are all about that broadside, and so they come with a lot of broadside weaponry. So you get the plasma macros and the heavy lance. Long range. Now, this is where you really do need to make a decision, because I would argue the Vengeance is better than the Mars, and as you can see, they are the same costing. The Avenger at $199 is actually very cost efficient. Even though it's only light macro batteries, there are 8 of them. That's 4 each side. That's a large number of shots coming off. They can do some serious work. Saying that, while I did have some success early on running a Avenger build, wasn't just Avengers, there was also a battleship in there, but it was pretty much Avengers was the main part of the build. The meta changed, not so good anymore. But feel free to experiment around. Right, and our last one, the Exorcist. So we get the 4 macro batteries and 4 launch bays, hence the reason why it's so expensive. Personally, I feel for the Imperial Navy at the very least, launch bays are probably a little overpriced, and that ship should not be that expensive because I found them to be inefficient versus just having weapons. You don't get anywhere near the damage on by using the bombers. Now, you've got a bit more versatility, I'll admit, but just my opinion on launch bays for the Imperial Navy at the least. So moving on to our battleships, and starting with the Retribution. So again, we get a nice increase to our defensive stats. Very slow rotation speed. I'm going to be honest, these things turn very slowly, especially as low maneuverability. They do not get the high energy turn maneuver. So these things turn super slow. Now, in terms of weaponry, what do we get though? Well, we get torps, 3 lance turrets, 6 plasma macro batteries weapons. So, a lot of weaponry, long range for the Retribution. The Emperor. Now, you'll notice the Emperor loses that frontal armor. You will also notice a little bit slower, but has that long ID range, much like our Cobra Widowmaker. So it is a nice little boost that it gets. Now, we do get 3 heavy macro turrets, 4 launch bays, and 2 heavy plasma macros on the side. So it can still put out a decent whack of damage, but again, the launch bays, I mean, I like the ID range on it. It's nice. I feel like battleships, for the most part, are relatively inefficient, though, just because of their speed, if nothing else. Now, out of all of them, the Apocalypse is probably the best. It's also the cheapest, and that's just because you get all the tankiness, you're still getting a decent whack of weaponry, and even though it's slow, the whole thing is probably more efficient points-wise, because you get a Nova Cannon, which is good, you get the 2 heavy macros, and you get Lancers. Now, you might be thinking, whoa, 9,000 on a ship that slow? Yes, but it does come with overload Lancers. So it does mean you do have to run in lock-on, if we're being honest, or at least until ships get close, then you might switch. But as long as no one's actually getting close, you run your overload, and now they have the range you want, because Lancers don't lose anything over range in terms of accuracy. So that's what I was running with the Avengers, to give them that bit more armor piercing. But like I said, that build hasn't worked so well in the more recent meta. I know the game's only been out for a bit, so the meta is still in a bit of flux, but that's just what I've found. And last but not least, we have the Oberon. So again, with the Oberon here, we have that increased identification range. And for weaponry, we have a bit of everything, really, because we got macro turrets, launch bays, super heavy lance batteries, and heavy plasma macro batteries. So we get that wide variety of damage out of it. So overall, cruisers are definitely your most efficient pick here. It's not to say you can't get use out of a battleship or a grand cruiser. I mean, they are fairly tanky, and sometimes that can be useful, but the battleships are very slow. So you either have to micro the rest of your fleet well enough to keep them in range, or you've got to protect them in some other way, because it's very easy to isolate those battleships and take them out, especially for your faster fleets. The Grand Cruisers, especially if you just run a bunch of them, tanky, can put out a lot of damage, but they can be kited fairly easily, as they tend to be shorter range damage, with the exception of the Vengeance. And even then, They're fairly easy to maneuver around because of how slow they are. Realistically, I leave it to your preference. Like I said, I found cruisers, just running a large number of cruisers tends to be the way to go. But by all means, experiment and see how you go. Right, so I'll leave you with that. We'll be doing the skills and upgrades in the next video. I hope you can join us for that. And until then, catch you later.